Welcome to Reason Workshop, Class 8. Today we're going to go over sampling. We'll start out with sampling input connections, then recording samples, then bounce clips to new samples, then editing samples, and assigning samples, and then finally a test. So to start out, I recommend you guys flip around the back of the rack. You can hit Tab. Now by default, you have input 1 and 2 from your hardware device connected to the sampling input left and right. This allows you to connect CD player, turntables, anything like that connected right to your hardware device and sample from it. Now that will make stereo samples. Okay, so if you want mono samples, like if you connect a microphone, then you would want to only enable one of those cables from input 1 to sampling input left. You can move that around to the other inputs that your hardware interface might have. Another thing you can do is resample within Reason itself. I'll show you a routing configuration I use, and we'll start out and create a spider, merger and splitter, which is in the Create menu under Other. Now a spider will take either one stereo input and split that out into 4 different outputs, or it will merge 4 different inputs together into one summed output. So what we're going to do now is take the master output of your mastering section to the input of the splitter section, and then we'll take the outputs 1 of that to your main audio outputs, and then we'll take audio output 2 of that spider and plug that into the sample input. This way you can sample any audio within your project by soloing tracks or groups of tracks. Let's start out and create an Octorex. And now we'll go into recording samples. So I just hit the sample button on the tool menu and it starts recording a sample. Now I'll show you how to sample from a mic plugged into my hardware interface. I have a mic plugged into 8 in my audio interface. Check, check, check. And I hit sample. Check, check, check. 1, 2. Now sample record buttons are found on the sample section of the tool window as well as on the following devices: Redrum, the NN19, the NNXT, and Kong. Another great feature is bounce clips to new samples. So if we go to import audio file and then into the Reason Factory Sound Bank and music loops, we can go into fixed tempo and just browse around through there. Okay, let's select this one. It's at 170 BPM. Before we load it in though, we will set our tempo to 170 beats per minute. Then when we open up that audio tempo, it's at 170, it will fit perfectly. Once that audio file is in, even though it's at 170 beats per minute, we can move the song tempo to whatever tempo we'd like and it will automatically adjust. Now I'll do some edits. In this case, we'll keep Snap to Grid on and just chop it up into 4 different little chunks. Now we'll draw a lasso around those 4 samples, and then go into the Edit menu, and there's this great little feature that's called Bounce Clips to New Samples. And now we can delete the devices, and we'll start with an entirely new piece created just by the samples that we made. So we have 4 samples that we created through chopping up that audio sample, and then we had 1 voice sample and 1 sample from the Octorex. Now we'll go through editing those samples. So we can just double click on them within the sample section of the tool window, and here's the first cut. We're going to start out and just do a fade in and fade out so that there are no audible clicks or clips within it. You can also normalize it. So you can just click on that and select normalize. Let's do the same thing for number 2. Fade it out. Select a little bit of the beginning and say fade in. And then select the whole thing and normalize. Now normalize means amplifying the volume of the selected sample so that the loudest peak in the sample is 0 decibels. Select the beginning and the end, fade in, fade out. When I hit normalize, you can see the whole thing moves up in volume a little bit. And we'll fade it in, fade it out. When I normalize it, it moves up drastically louder. Now there's where the sample starts. Even though it records everything previous to that, the second that you play, it will move the beginning to right when the first transient or sound is hit. So let's crop it. And let's also duplicate that sample just to get a few different options, because the phrase has like a beginning and a variation in it. And let's just take the very end of it. And let's crop that. And let's fade it out and fade it in just a little bit. Now you always want to fade in before the height of the first attack transient. Now you can also put the name in. So here we'll just call that bass sample 2. Let's go to the first one and double click on it, open it up, and then call that bass sample 1. Hit save. And now let's go to that vocal sample. Check, check, check. 1, 2. What to do with that? Let's start out and try reversing it. Yeah, maybe just that little click right there could be like a lo-fi hi-hat. So let's just select that little cut and crop it. Fade it out, fade it in. Save that as Vox hi-hat. Make sure to normalize it. Now for assigning samples. So when we open up an instrument, let's start out with opening up a redrum, and we will go into the edit menu and initialize the patch. Okay, that means taking out all of the samples and parameters within it, so it's completely empty. We'll hit browse sample at the top of each redrum channel, which looks like a little folder. In locations, we'll go into song samples. We'll go to the unassigned samples because these are the ones that obviously aren't assigned yet, and we'll just pick each one of those. And as you can see, they are taken out of the unassigned samples folder each time that I assign them to a redrum, and they will actually appear in assigned samples in the song samples folder under a redrum device. So we have all those samples, each one assigned. We're also going to move up the decay type so that it has a cutoff to it. So as long as your finger presses down, it's triggered. As soon as your finger comes up, it stops. Let's also turn velocity all the way off just by moving the velocity knobs to 12 o'clock. Let's just make a basic loop with this. As you can hear, we completely reordered the notes within that sample. We can also adjust the pitch. A lot of times samples sound great playing around with the octaves of them, and it will still stay in time and it will be at pitch but an octave lower. hope this gives you an idea of some of the possibilities with sampling in